Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. This is Mike Boyd with iRecon. Today, I am very fortunate to have Micah Tindor on the podcast. So, Micah, could you tell us a little bit about who are you and what do you do?
Absolutely. I am the Senior Director of Kelley Blue Book Instant Cash Offer. I've been in that role now with Cox Automotive for a couple months, about a quarter. I first joined the Cox Automotive team with Mike, so just a little background for those of you who don't know, Mike and I are the ones that founded iRecon and grew it together. I've known Mike since 2008 when we
Oh, no, I
first
was
worked.
definitely going to have to add in there that I'm not going to pretend like I do not know who Micah is. Obviously, I consider you a close personal friend. One of the things I wanted to jump in, so obviously we just got back from Digital Dealer, which was
Yep,
a huge success. Great feedback from dealers, a lot of energy. I think everybody was just so happy to get back to some sort of normality and seeing each
absolutely.
other.
It
You
was
know, I
it
think
was so nice to be at a show again and get to see dealers who you haven't seen in a long time, see some of the other vendors you haven't seen in a long time, just start to talk
that's
about things face to face again.
and I played $20. I went to donate my $20 in the slot machines and I won 350. So I mean everything was great, right? That's about as good as it gets for the car guy.
So I figured I would follow Mike's example. I played $20 in the exact same slot machine the in the morning before I left and immediately lost it. So I need to steal some of your luck, Mike.
Yeah, either that or just give me your $20 and I'll bet it for you.
Yeah, even better.
So, speaking of digital dealers, so we both had a session. Of course, my session was on pay plans and compensation plans and
Hmm.
whether or not they reinforce the behavior that our market needs, because our market has changed.
Yep.
What we should expect our employees and our coworkers to do is completely different from a year ago or 2 years or even 3 years ago. Yet, when I got into business quite a few years ago, essentially pay plans are the same.
Yeah.
Obviously doesn't make a lot of sense. And then, of course, I was fortunate enough to catch your session. Do you remember the title of your session?
Absolutely. My session was how dealers execute buy anywhere strategies. So we're looking at best practices from dealers around the US who are buying vehicles from consumers and not just from consumers on trade-ins, but also using Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or buying off garage sales. So it was a really interesting session to see how the market's kind of responding to those changes and to the consumer's expectation of that interface with the dealer when trying to sell their car.
Right. And both sessions, like I said, were very well attended. Now, of course, being digital dealer, obviously that's a hot button with acquisition right now in the market.
Hmm.
But being a digital dealer, usually focused more on the marketing and the digital advertising side. Um, but a lot of people talking about compensation plans. And one of the reasons I wanted to get with you today, right after we got back, was a couple of the things you said in your session, which I think directly tie into that whole thought process of mine of like how we have to reimagine that compensation plan to have people do what we want. So having said that, you mentioned on one of your slides, and of course you spoke to it, that setting protocol for the acquisition process.
Hmm.
And it really made me think. So when I talk to dealers, of course, I'm telling you really have to double down on buying direct from consumers.
Hmm.
And the consumer is the customer, not just for buying a car. You actually have to take it back, I think, a notch and look at it as that consumer as like the goal is just to get their car.
Yeah,
And then the
agreed.
sale will happen, auto magically after that. But first, nothing good or bad starts until you own a car. So let's
Yeah.
focus and double down on buying a car. But as we put focus on that at the dealership level, I have really yet to hear anybody talk about that chain of events that has to happen to facilitate that sale, taking in that vehicle. And that's what you were talking about. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Of like, what are those things that need to happen if you're fortunate enough to get that customer and hey, let's do a deal. Let's buy your car.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because we've been talking to dealers across the US about what they're doing. We're trying to figure out really what best practices are and what we can tell the industry from the source of dealers that we have to help guide best practices. And a couple of things that we found around it are you got to understand that when buying from a consumer, And particularly if it's not in the store as part of a trade-in, it's a much different engagement process, right? If someone's selling their car on Craigslist or Facebook, they have much different engagement than what you're going to see buying at the auction versus a dealer. So you have to start with understanding how you need to approach it strategically, right? You need to align your customer acquisition strategy to your overarching dealer strategy so that you know, are you going to buy every car when you go and look at it? Are you only going to buy cars that you need? And then also, very importantly, what channels are you going to look at as part of the acquisition process? Are you going to look at service and trade-ins as a channel? Are you going to use an external lead driving tool like KBB ICO? Or are you going to go the step farther and start doing social media marketing of your own, trying to draw in customers who want to sell their car? And then you have to follow it down the process map, right? So the next step in the process is ensuring that your salespeople are trained on how to do an appraisal properly in a way that will adapt to the current customer's needs, because the customer needs are changing and customers are showing up now knowing their vehicle's value. So you got to make sure they're trained. You got to make sure they know that there's some air cover, because this is a new and different experience. So you need to make sure that your dealership staff know what they're allowed to do and know what's safe for them to do. And then one of the big ones that's hard to figure out sometimes is, for each channel, you need to determine how are you going to pay for the vehicle and how are you going to acquire the vehicle. What I mean by that is,
that was actually the piece I wanted to jump in first. I'm going to write down air cover, because that was something you had mentioned, and I think that's something very important to bring up here in a second. But facilitating that purchase, that's where you were just getting into. Nobody ever talks about that. Great, Micah, thank you so much for coming in here. I just took a look at your vehicle. I can offer you $19,000. You say, okay, great, that works. But then you're not buying the car. Yeah, what does the dealership do at that point?
I think that's a great question. And interestingly, it's different for the different channels, which is why I think it's strategic as a dealership to determine, where are we going to pursue vehicles? Are we going to do Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, and buying from garage sales, so to speak? Because if you think about it, if I'm selling my car on Craigslist, I've looked up the value and I've posted it on Craigslist. If you as a dealer contact me and say you're interested and you want to execute the deal, I am expecting the same thing I'd expect when I interact with a normal human. I'm expecting you're going to pay on the spot, and we're immediately going to go transact the title. I'm going to hand you the keys. I'm going to dedicate 2 or 3 hours of my life to this, and the vehicle is going to be gone, right? But with the dealership, how are you going to pay? Are you going to pay with a check? How are you going to get the vehicle? Is someone going to go with them to exchange the title? Are you going to make them come to the dealership? How are you going to pick up the vehicle? So for each channel, you have to think of it from a customer's point of view and get an understanding of what they're going to expect, and then see how far your dealership is willing to meet in the middle and build that plan out for each of those channels specifically.
Okay, so would you say then, and I really like where your head's at, and I really like what you're talking about, because it's one thing to say, hey, we want to sell cars online. It's a whole other thing to sell cars online. And we usually figure it out by tripping over the customer on our way to finding out the better way. So obviously I'm a process-oriented person.
Yep.
When we talk about setting up protocol, so really there should be a book. There should literally be a book and say, hey, if these are the 3, 4, 5, or whatever that number is, ways that we can transact purchasing, on a customer's vehicle to buy their vehicle, if it is a title in hand, how long until the check is ready? What are those checks and balances to make sure that the title is actually clear and doesn't have electronic lien?
Yep.
When are we going to hand over? All of those things need to be clearly written out, so that way we don't drop the ball. We don't ruin that experience, still end up buying their car, but completely ruin the experience where either they leave unhappy, they still got their money, but they're going to leave unhappy because we look like we do not know what we're doing, which of course could lead to them definitely not coming back and purchasing a car.
Yeah. What I think is interesting about the consumer acquisition side is, forget about selling another car for a minute. You get a car, right? Which right now, as you like to say, Mike, the car is the star. So you get a car, which is a win. But also you, if you're doing it right now, have a new customer in your CRM. You have a new marketing opportunity. You have a new sale opportunity down the road. And you have a new opportunity for referrals. So you're absolutely right that when engaging these customers in this process, you want to have a focus on the customer experience, because you want to capture that customer so you now have a new customer. And everyone has their own different way of calculating the value of a customer. But just
So
by
the
buying
new
the car,
sale,
whatever your customer's worth, you just added that to your dealership's bottom
yeah.
line.
So the new sale is the purchase.
It is.
I mean, that's actually a term we can probably coin right now because we've spoke about this before.
Yep.
But if you look at where the market's at, since nothing good or bad happens until you have a car, and if the customer is choosing to reinvent the way they purchase by going through their trade-in first, what's wrong with that? So if we put as much importance on that CSI, that customer satisfaction of that process, that in itself will lead to additional sales. But we have to focus in on that, right?
Agree completely. And I really like something you said there. You said that the customers are changing in the way that they engage in this process, and they are. I mean, historically, customers haven't had a very good understanding of the price of their vehicle. They might get a price range somewhere and they show up and they're hoping to be in a certain price range. But through the COVID period, that's really changed. And KBBICO recently did a survey of consumers looking to sell their vehicles, asking them, what is the number of solutions that you use to value your vehicle? And it was interesting because we saw that 65% of all consumers were going to get between 1 and 3 sources of value online. 1 and 3 exact offers, not just a range, but 1 and 3 exact offers. As we look more down the line towards younger generations, we see that about 25% of total consumers, not just younger, total consumers, are going to get somewhere between 4 and 6 quotes. And that really obviously goes up if you're looking at digital natives, millennials and Gen Zs. And then some of the super young people, digital natives like Gen Z, are looking at 8+ sources. So whether you're 75 years old or 18, there's a 97% chance that the person walking into your store has 1 to 3 price offers on their vehicle. So it's that idea of giving a customer a good experience is much different knowing the customer's coming in with an idea of what their vehicle's worth. You can't hit them super low and walk them down if they know their vehicle's $3,000 more.
Them with a solid offer.
Yeah.
A solid offer. This is what I'm willing to pay for your car. Because that right there, I would have to guess, and this isn't a educated / uneducated guess, but if the older generation is getting between 1 to 3 offers on their vehicle before they come in, it's because they're not as digitally native as the younger generation. So they're aware of 1 to 3. If they are aware of 4, pretty sure it's going to turn into 4. So as you get younger and you're more ingrained in the digital side, then you're obviously going to be aware or at least have access and know where to get access to additional outlets to get even more quotes on your vehicle. Yep. So for any dealership in this day and age to approach a deal like, let's just try them on. Let's, it's worth 10, but let's hit them at 8 because I think I can hold them. All bad. Because I've never, we talk about there's a couple big players out there. We don't have to say the names. We all know. As soon as somebody says there's a couple big players, we all know the names. I've never heard of them calling somebody back and saying, oops, I talked to my manager and we really like your hairstyle. So I think I can get you a little bit more money if you do the deal today.
I agree completely. And the other thing to think about is the different life positions that these generations are in. And what I mean by that is those 75% of older people who are getting 1 to 3 sources. Overall, it averages out when you have all generations, 65% use 1 to 3 sources, but older generations, 75% are going to have 1 to 3 sources. They don't need the deal as bad. They don't need the value of their vehicle for a trade-in as bad. They're not as in much of a hurry to buy a new vehicle. But if you look at the other side, if you look at Gen Zs who are just starting to buy and millennials who are becoming one of the strongest driving forces on the buy side, they have less disposable income. They're in more of a hurry. They have a higher debt burden, so they're also looking for a faster experience, a quicker access to the equity of their vehicle, and they want the maximum dollar for their trade. So when these two things line up, it creates a really interesting conundrum for dealers because someone comes in knowing the value of their vehicle, plus they have to get that value out of their vehicle to buy their new vehicle. And as we see new vehicle prices going up, it's going to continue to trend towards needing the max you can on your current vehicle to flip as equity into your new vehicle.
Well,
So
how
back
about
to
we
your
think about
whole,
this for a second? If you look at the older generation, which I think I'm pretty sure I count as one of the older generation, which does not make me feel good at the moment. But if you look at what you were just saying, I have other vehicles.
Mhm.
I have a spouse. I can transact and walk away and not have to get something right away versus a younger generation that, hey, maybe I am the only person in my household.
Yeah.
Maybe walking is not what I want to do once I sell you my car. So I need access to the money to transact on my next deal. So there are other mitigating factors in that decision-making process.
Yeah, there are. And what you said about hitting the customer right when they come in the first time, I think is one of the key things that the market needs to adjust to going forward. If the consumers know what their vehicle's worth, and if the consumers have 1 to 3 or 1 to 6 other price options with a dealership name attached, even if it's one of the ones that we don't like to mention, you can't roll in and hit them at 2 grand lower, they'll walk out. And very interestingly, my father-in-law just bought a Subaru Forester, and he was trading in another car for it. And he went to a dealership where he's bought his last 3 vehicles, and they offered him an amount that wasn't within the range that he thought his vehicle was worth. So the dealership gave him something. They offered him 500 less than he knew he could get elsewhere. The man who's bought his last 3 vehicles from that dealership and has worked at one job for all but 2 years of his adult life left his tried and trusted relationship over $500 on the trade-in side. So the idea that customers don't know and the idea that we can hit them low and walk them down is gone. You have to start hitting customers right. We need to start, strategically, right? Look at where you need to be strategically in price to market, walk backwards to where that puts you cost to market, and then put the money on. With a big focus on recon, obviously, because that's going to affect your margins.
So when we talk about this process, so we just talked about, hey, okay, we have to be able to handle the money end of the transaction.
Mm-hmm.
But long before we get to the money end of the transaction, there's a connection.
Yeah.
Where the person actually comes in. So where's your head go when we talk about salespeople? Because you mentioned like salespeople earlier. So a salesperson is not selling something in this interaction. So would you immediately take that person, let's say it's you, Micah, you're looking to sell your vehicle, and just tell the salesperson, hey, just hand them off to a manager as fast as possible, or tell them to go sit in the corner? Or would you use the salespeople as part of that valuation process?
That's a good question. So I will tell you what we know the market wants from a buying perspective, what experience they want, and then how I would craft the dealership engagement based on that. So in the survey we did, one of the things we looked at was the emotional function. And it's really just what emotions need to be met as part of the sales process. And it can be grouped into 3 things. One is that consumers want to know they're getting the maximum amount for their vehicle, right? So if I have a navigation system, I don't want it to be missed and the value of the navigation be excluded. 2, they want to be knowledgeable on the value of their vehicle, be knowledgeable on the market, be knowledgeable of how dealers are going to try to screw them so that they can get the max amount for their vehicle. And 3, and this was the one that really kind of caught me off guard, is they are very interested in having camaraderie in the buying experience. They are looking for someone to share in that car selling, dealership car buying experience with them. So knowing that, I think if you roll a manager out, they're automatically going to get that fight or flight instinct. When a manager comes out in a car dealership deal, as a consumer, history shows they're there to try to drive the nail in the coffin, right? They're there to close me. And that makes people uncomfortable. So knowing that the emotional function is they want a collaborative sales process and buy process, I think it's essential to have your frontline salespeople walk around the car, have that process in place, to engage a customer, but make it more of a partnership. You and Brian on your last podcast talked about how he empowers his salespeople to appraise vehicles. And I don't remember the exact number. He quotes a super high number of appraisers he has because all of his salespeople appraise. And he said something very interesting because he creates that collaborative experience. And he said the customer will point out damage that the salesperson missed because they don't want them to get in trouble. And I think that's what we need to get to in the market.
So here's what's really funny. So I'm going to take you back quite a few years. When I first got into business, back when it was more about selling horses than it was cars, maybe not quite that far back. But we would do what we call a silent appraisal. So essentially what we're talking about is doing our jobs. That's the funny part. We're not talking about bringing in a brand new way of appraising vehicles. That was the correct way to appraise vehicles when I got in the business, but it just wasn't enforced. And that was literally, you would have a 3-sheet paper, carbon paper, and you would write down. I'd be like, Micah, let's go out to your vehicle, and I'd write down all the information on your car. I'd get the VIN number, the miles, and then I would walk around your vehicle with you and say, okay, Micah, let's actually take a look at your vehicle, and you can give me any information. Have you done any recent service?
Yeah.
When did you last have brakes done? Hey, let's take a look at your tires. Ooh, this tire is at the wear bar. Let me show you where the wear bar actually is on the tire.
Yeah.
And maybe run my hand along a dent and not say anything, which is like truth serum. I gave Mike a truth serum. He's telling me, yeah, I accidentally hit this and whatever.
Yep.
But when you say collaborative, I'm bringing Micah into the fold. I'm saying, hey, look, we're going to put our heads together. We're going to walk around this vehicle. We're going to get all the information. We're going to agree or disagree, but we're going to come together and we're going to say, hey, this is the information we have. Now let's go into the actual numbers. How much is it going to cost to get this car? Because at the end of the day, Micah, I have to sell this vehicle. You get to walk away. So you want top dollar, which is totally understandable. And I want to give you every dollar I can, but I can't give you money your car's not worth. And walking you through that collaborative method is a much easier transaction. It just always is. So essentially, I just want to make sure everybody listening, we're not talking about creating a new way of doing things. We're just saying, hey, look, the correct way is the way we should have always been doing it. But now the consumer is demanding it because they have access to information. And when they go on these third-party sites and they're getting these offers for their vehicle, what's the first thing they do? They enter all that information of, hey, has the car been smoked in? Do you have 2 keys? Has there been an accident? When was the last time the tires were replaced? All that information that you are inputting, so now you're collaborating, and then it's coming up with a valuation.
Yep. And that's what they trust, right? That's what consumers trust now.
It makes perfect sense.
It does. And if you think back to that, one of their emotional function needs is to understand the process the dealer's going through so they don't feel like they're getting ripped off. That's exactly it. What you talk to is exactly it. So now you're meeting 2 of their emotional functions, that collaborative engagement and visibility, peace of mind, confidence in the buying process. Because I, as the dealer, just walked around the car. We agreed on all this damage, and we sit down and I say, I'm going to try to sell this car for $23,500. It's going to take me, you saw the damage, we agreed there's dents, it needs new tires, and there's paint chips on the hood. With my guys, it's going to take me about $2,000 to get that done. So from $23,500, I'm at $21,500. I got about $500 in taxes. So I'm going to put it at $23,500. The best I can give you is $21,000. And I would love to transact, love to have you as a customer.
So we're almost talking about the History Channel, the show Pawn Stars and Pickers. They go into people's homes and say, hey, let me go ahead and take your prized possession off your wall, and let me tell you what it's really worth, and let me tell you what I'm going to be able to give you because I still need to make a buck. And what's funny is at the end of it, they're all hugging and kissing, everybody's fine. Or Pawn Stars, people bring in things and they get an expert appraisal and they actually come together and say, okay, look, I still have to make a buck on this. So that's what we're saying. We're just saying, hey, let's make sure we give them the information. Let's make it make sense. And then try to make it as easy as possible for that deal to transact, which the deal in this case is that purchase of their vehicle. Now, you mentioned, though, the salesperson. So are you saying that you like that idea of the salesperson selling the purchase of their car rather than selling them a new car? Because this is different, right?
Yep. I do. And I think there's 2 things to it. One is what you always say, which is the car is the star. And particularly in this current era, we need to acquire inventory, right? Dealers have to acquire inventory. So salespeople need to wear the hat of buy the car from the consumer. Even if you're not going to be able to sell a second one, you have a way to stock your inventory. You have them in your CRM now, so they're a future customer. So we want those salespeople out there with a heavy focus on if a car shows up, get that car into inventory as long as it matches your strategy. But secondly, if we really focus on the emotional needs of the consumer, Because let's be realistic, most of us are emotional. Most of us are reacting based on emotion. So we need to be very focused on their emotional needs. And that emotional needs of a collaborative, engaging process is easier when it's not the boss.
No, I agree 100%. So now let's tie into what I was talking about. So in my session, I've been talking about this for a long time, but in the actual session, I started breaking down the difference between pay plans and compensation plans.
It was awesome.
And the first piece was a pay plan. Where's the actual dollars and cents, and what is that behavior we're trying to influence? Because really, that's what a pay plan does. And a compensation plan obviously is everything. The why be an employee here, and the things that we do, that's your total, right? Your total comp. So when we talk about having a salesperson, which I personally hate the term salesperson because the market's changed. We're not selling much. We're sales facilitators, right? If we do our job correctly, we're sales facilitators. So with that understanding that if we want them to concentrate on taking the car in and appraising it correctly, then we need to tie their pay plan and total compensation plan around those behavior that will drive a higher look to book, a higher success rate, correct?
Agreed
so
completely.
The sell is the acquisition of the car, and they should be compensated for that. I think that's fair, and I think it's something that absolutely can be measured and improved upon.
Yeah. I mean, one, you mentioned your session. If you guys weren't able to attend, I would encourage you to in some way find one of the slides Mike had, because it outlines what is the difference between a compensation plan and a pay plan, and compensation structure and a pay plan. I have honestly never seen so many cell phones come out of pockets to snap a screenshot in a session as I have. And it's really interesting because he talked a lot about the emotional factor again, the emotional function, the same thing as driving the consumer side. But what do the salesperson need? What does the manager need? What do the people in the dealership need? So it was really informative, and it's not just to try to, promote my friend Mike Boyd. I've not seen such strong response from a dealer body before. But I agree with you completely, Mike, because one of the things that we know people in a dealership are looking for, because it's something that, according to researchers, is something that people are looking for, period, in their job, is to know where I'm going in the future and have control over my own destiny. Those are the two things. If you look at Harvard Business Review research on what are the driving needs of people looking for a job and in a job, it's those two items. And those two items are what are being delivered in this instance that you're talking about. You're enabling the salesperson to have control over their own destiny, right? You give them the opportunity to bring a car in. You give them the opportunity to generate revenue on it, and you give them the opportunity to stock a car on the lot that they can sell again in the future. So you're giving them that control of their own destiny,
which is a higher motivator than the actual dollars and cents that you're paying them. Yeah. The data proves that out. But hey, let's take that back another step, or as my good friend Lance would say, let's peel that onion back a little bit. So you've been around dealerships your entire life because you're a family. And of course, I started off chasing bumpers quite a few years ago, moved my way up. And for those of you who are listening, because I've actually had a dealership say, what do you mean you start off chasing bumpers? That is a term in the Midwest, means you sold cars. You actually started off selling cars. So I just want to let everybody know. But right now, I would challenge every dealer who's listening, if they have not heard a salesperson say, when a customer comes in and the salesperson goes out and says, hey, welcome to XY dealership, how can I help you? Which I'm not saying is the correct way to introduce yourself, but that's what we say a lot. And then that person says, well, I'm not looking to buy anything. I'm just looking to sell my car. It is like cold water gets thrown on the salesperson. They're like, oh yeah, let me go get a manager. Go sit in the corner. And then the customer sits in the corner while you try to find where the manager is. And then the manager, who's doing a million different things, goes, what do you need? Well, somebody here wants to sell you the car. And you're like, ugh. He's not interested in buying one? No, okay, well, just tell him I'll be out in a little bit. And if you it just trends south. That is current market.
It is. And if you think about that compared to the unmentionables that we're all competing against that you referenced earlier,
they are putting more focus on your car than selling you a car.
Because they correctly understand that it's two things. One, a way to stock your lot, right? One of them, who just finished their quarterly review, so if you Google it, you can figure out which one that is, had a 70% replacement rate. 70% of what they sold versus what they acquired. They could have stocked 70% of all their sales from consumer acquisitions.
And that's going up.
Yeah.
It's increasing.
What is interesting is something you said, and I didn't know, but we're seeing a decrease in the market of look to book, meaning from the number of times you look at a vehicle to the number of times you book it into inventory, how good you are at that appraisal process. They are increasing.
The number is 23%. For those who did not attend the session or haven't listened to it, the number is actually 23%. So nationally, the look to book, the success rate is 23%. So that's almost 80% of the time we're not taking those cars in. And why would that be that the national look to book is going down with the heightened importance on acquiring vehicles? Sounds to me like people are going elsewhere and we're pushing them elsewhere.
Yeah. And that's why we see the drastic spike in some of those public traded companies who are the big competitors out there that no one ever wants to mention. You see things like, I think it was something like 79% growth month over month for the one who just released their numbers. So,
and
yeah.
Let's be real, in this market right now, for anybody to be pounding their chest about how great their sales are and that they feel like they're the greatest ever because they're making more per copy, guess what? Everybody is.
Yeah.
It's hard to make a bad acquisition decision. It's
Yep.
hard to put too much money in a vehicle when we've seen things that literally whatever you think you overpaid for today, wait 60 days, wink, wink, it's probably going to be worth more.
Yep. You got customers willing to pay above MSRP for vehicles right now, right?
Just to get them.
You can be the worst. You could look like a genius and be the worst salesperson, worst sales manager, worst run dealership ever right now because we're at record high margins. But so at some point that's going to right itself, right? We're going to reach market equilibrium. And what I like to encourage dealers to think about is having a diversified acquisition process. I've heard you say 100 times, there is a right time for every form of acquisition, the auction, the service lane, a trade-in. But if you don't have a solid plan built around how to get consumer cars,
you won't be able to pivot in time.
Right.
So you have to chase the market down, trying to figure out how to be relevant in that market.
And really, I think we can encapsulate this all by something you said earlier, Mike, which is you said this isn't something new. It's what we all know we're supposed to do. What I think seems to be trending in the market is that we all are starting to get an idea of what we need to do around consumer acquisition. Now, this data around the number of vehicles that people are shopping for and the emotional function is new, and that's going to help guide things. But if we would take the time, if each dealership would take the time and put the same focus on building a successful process to acquire vehicles, to recondition vehicles, as they do to sell vehicles, I think we would see a pretty quick turn in the look to book. It's nothing new. If I tell you need to develop a way to pay customers, you need to figure out how quickly you can give them, you can pay them, how quickly you can validate the title. Can you do accelerated title? That's all stuff that we've already sorted out on the sales side. We have a full end-to-end playbook for it, as you referenced earlier. So it's just a matter of putting enough proper attention to build out the full strategy and the full process map on the customer acquisition side.
So therein lies the opportunity. So if we know the market has changed, and it'll keep changing, it's never going to stop, keep speeding up. I say that every time I speak. Mm-hmm. If we understand that, and right now we're in a very unique situation. We've never been in this situation in the automotive industry before, where if you have a car, you're probably going to sell the car and you're going to make a lot of money. So shouldn't this be the time that we take the opportunity to level set and reinvent our internal processes? Yep. Maybe really think about that salesperson being a sales facilitator, and that the sale may be the purchase of a vehicle or the sell of another vehicle.
Yeah.
And then align pay and compensation plans to drive the behavior to create the right environment where Micah would want to sell me his vehicle. Because at some point, maybe Micah comes back down the road, if not right now, and buys another vehicle. And we do see the data. We understand a lot of times that even though Micah may be approaching the deal the way he wants, which is, I want to know what you're giving me for my car because that's mine. I own that. Mm-hmm. You own your car. We do see that the minute that's handled, that they say, okay, now I'm in acquisition mode. Now let's talk. You took care of me through that. I
Yep.
feel more comfortable. I have a good understanding of how you do business. Now let's transact on the next one.
Yeah. And a high percentage of the time, right, customers are looking to buy that replacement vehicle to your point, and they want to roll the equity. Very few people want to put their equity in their pocket in a form of a check and then buy something fresh. They want to roll that into the new sale. So agree with you completely. I think what we saw in our latest survey was 60% of the time customers are buying another vehicle. And that 40% sounds high, right? 40% of the time the customers are just selling a vehicle. But you have to remember that customers are well aware of the chip shortage and well aware of the damage to a dealership. Now you can look at KBB has done a survey of customer understanding and expectations with the chip shortage. And they just released the second round of it. They looked at it back in Q1 and they looked at it again at the end of Q2. And consumers are aware of the chip shortage, expect it to impact their buying decision, and are aware that prices are high. Now they also have access, and we know that they're shopping 1 to 6 pricing tools. So it's natural to think that if people have some excess vehicles, have a vehicle that grandma unfortunately just passed and they have grandma's vehicle, they're going to be looking to relieve some inventory. So we're seeing probably a little bit of an inflated straight sale. But one thing we do know is customers are starting to disjoin the sale from the acquisition. And that's back to this idea that they're price shopping and younger generations need more equity in their vehicles. So they're going to go to wherever they can get the best price.
But the education's there
vehicle.
now. That's
Yep.
the thing. So we've seen that change from the dealer holding all the cards, the only one who truly understands the worth of a vehicle, to the internet, to
Yep.
where now people start looking up across different markets what that vehicle is worth. And now they have access and they're being courted by everyone. They are the belle of the ball if they have a vehicle and they understand they're looking up that information, which I think is a very positive thing. If I look back in my career, the best deals I've ever made weren't the highest profit. They weren't the lowest profit. They're just the best deals where we both shook hands at the end and everybody felt good were the ones where either I knew them or a friend had referred them, or for whatever reason, we had a great relationship and we just talked. And it was
Yep.
just about, hey, let me show you real numbers.
Yep.
You know, it's kind of like that salesperson gets the sales manager and the sales manager gets involved and he goes, look, I'm going to cut straight to it and talk to you like a real person.
Yep.
And then magic happens.
I think that you're touching on something interesting, Mike. And I don't know if we'll have time to talk about it in detail, but people are no longer loyal to brand. I think we know that through research. I think, and haven't seen any research to prove this, I think people are loyal to experience now.
I think it's exactly right. Because if you look at the market, cars, there used to be a very big difference between the satisfaction rates of different brands, the experience of different brands. But now, because of how competitive the market has been and is, how much of a difference CSI makes and that consumer journey makes to the dealership for their floor plan, for everything, the overall experience and the overall quality of the cars has led to consumers feeling very comfortable moving from that car that they first got, that brand that took care of them, because they feel really comfortable the next brand's going to take care of them too. And if it doesn't, they have a voice. Somebody's going to hear, somebody's going to take care of it. So brand loyalty, you're better off throwing all of your weight on the experience and what's unique about your vehicle or your line of vehicles, and then catering that customer for that. So I think you're absolutely right, especially in a market with constrained inventory.
Yeah, for sure. And if you can't get them to come back because they're used to buying the same vehicle, you can get them to come back because Mike and Micah had a really good interaction. Mike treated me the way I would want to be treated. Mike gave me
It's very collaborative.
The collaborate back to those emotional functions. Mike met my emotional functions. So I had a good experience with Mike. I'm going to go back. It's just like when we find someone to fix our vehicle, right? If you're looking for an independent mechanic, you find someone you trust, they may be ripping you off for all you know, but for some reason you had a connection with them that made you feel like you could trust them. Now you're going to go to them repeatedly, you're going to tell everyone you know about them. It's just the way it works. It's not that they gave you the best price, it's that they made you feel a certain way. So I think the industry's shifting, and I agree with you completely. It's the perfect time while margins are high on vehicles, or I shouldn't say necessarily margins are high, but while you're getting some record prices on vehicles, depending on how well you can get into, your margins might be high too. But while we're getting some record price on vehicles, it's a good opportunity to start putting some of these changes in place.
Absolutely, because it's not going to ever go back to, it'll be a new normal, right? That term new normal is never going to be the old way. And if it ever does, it's going to be a lot of years before we get to that situation where we have such a glut of inventory. So yeah, I think we definitely need to take the opportunity to reinvent our structure, rethink our go-to-market strategy, and look at those pay plans and those compensation plans and the behavior that we are actually trying to enforce, because it is different. It is absolutely different.
I agree completely. I like the sculptures behind you, by the way.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So let's talk about 2 or 3 key takeaways that you think is the most important thing that our dealers should take away from this conversation.
So if I'm looking at it, it's the change in consumer expectation. The consumers now have an understanding what their vehicle's worth, they're price shopping it, and there's an emotional need that they need to meet. We need to think about those parts first. If we hit the customer too low, they're going to walk, and if we give them a bad experience, they're going to walk. And they have other people in their phone, in their email, in their text messages who have reached out to them and want to acquire that vehicle. So for me, that's number one. Number two is the combined thing that we talked about both in your session and my session, which is setting your dealership processes and tying your pay plan to it. You can't have behavior that you're not monitoring. You can't track it. You can't provide improvement. How am I supposed to improve? If I've never ran a 1 mile, how do I know how well I run a 1 mile? All right. If I run it in 6 minutes, is that good? Could I run it in 4? I don't know. I've never run it before. So we need to put some practices and habits in place for that. And then number 3, I think it's to start. It's not necessarily anything we said, but it's what is being wrapped up in. We need to be very comfortable with change as an industry. And we didn't talk about it in depth, but we're talking about things changing. Processes that we've always known changing overnight. During COVID, suddenly customers have lost the information asymmetry, or we have lost the information asymmetry. Customers know what their vehicle's worth. So we need to start becoming more comfortable with change and being willing to change anything it takes end to end in our business to make sure we survive. Think of it from a startup perspective. We need to be able to pivot rapidly to whatever the new norm is. So for me, it's customer expectations have changed. We need to build dealer processes around it, and we need to start getting comfortable with change. What do you think are the key things?
I think you're spot on. Absolutely. Rethinking the way we do things and those behaviors, because the customer's desire and need is different. We've known what they've wanted. We've just never been in a situation where we had to change our behavior too much. We dabble in it. We say, hey, we're a digital first dealership. We're the friendly dealership. You know, we all sound like we're a really friendly, great place to buy a car at. That doesn't always translate well once the consumer actually shows up. And we know the consumer is very interested, and they should be, in reversing our logic a little bit on that, how that transaction is going to take place. And I'll go back to what I said at the very beginning, which is I think we should concentrate even more on purchasing their car than selling them a car, because I think that will lead to more sales, especially in this market where if you've got a car, odds are you're going to sell a car because of constrained inventory. So less focus on selling them a car, more focus on buying them a car, which is actually what the consumer wants too. They'll feel more comfortable. You'll get an at bat. And even, like you said earlier, even if they do not purchase a vehicle right now, they are in your CRM. You've created a connection. You now have a warm lead for follow-up. You are now a phone a friend. And that is a wonderful place to be. So understanding we have to reinvent who we are, coming up with the protocol and having it clearly written out, which we didn't get into, and I know we're running short on time here, but you mentioned air cover. I'm going to hopefully not butcher it, but this is what I took from your session. When we say air cover, which I commend you for mentioning that, very few people, unfortunately, will do the right thing just because they know it's the right thing with total disregard to the fallout. So people have to be comfortable and enabled and empowered to do the right thing and understand that their managers are going to back them.
Yeah.
Because,
got
hey, guess what? I don't expect my appraisers to get a car 100% of the time. What I expect from my appraisers 100% of the time is great notes, great photos,
follow that
clear
process.
clear understanding of what they would have expected me to spend to get that car frontline ready. And then if we do not take that vehicle in trade, we can go back and review it and understand why. Is it something we can change because our internal pricing is too high? Or does our appraiser not quite know how to estimate?
Yep.
Right?
You hit the nail on the head.
But again, that air cover piece is your people have to feel empowered, which is on that slide of one of the top things, right? That people want as part of a compensation plan above and beyond just money is they want to feel empowered that they actually make a difference, that they're part of the team.
Yep. That's what we all want. We all want to feel like our voice matters in whatever it is, right? Whether it's a relationship, whether it's a friendship, whether it's work, we want to feel like what we're doing matters. And you're right. That's it.
And then number 3 is hold them accountable. I always have to hold them accountable. But if they do not understand what they're going to be held accountable for, that is on the management team.
Agree.
Because most employees do not truly understand what a win is, what is good, what is bad. Because I know my children, they pretty much understand when dad's going to be upset. And then when dad does get upset, they're like, yeah, we saw that one happening. And you know what happens? They self-manage. They work within that structure that I've asked them to because they have clear understanding of what's going to happen if they do something wrong. But they also understand what they need to do right, which falls back to that protocol, right? Provide
absolutely.
Right.
Get that process in place.
So communication. So thank you so much for taking the time, Mike. I really think there's more that we can discuss here, but I wanted to get on a call real quick with you, get some of these thoughts because, like I said, we just got back last night from Digital Dealer.
Keep it fresh.
Big buzzwords out there, acquisition. Nobody has enough cars. The market has changed on how consumers want to give us their cars, so we definitely have to do something. And I know people were taking lots of notes.
People were interested in that. And we have a
whole. There were more people talking to you at the end of your session than me, which I personally take that that's okay. But the other one was people talking about pay plans and compensation plans.
Yep. And particularly
how do we get more employees. How do we retain our employees?
Well, it was a digital session, and a ton of people were showing up to talk about pay plans, right? To hear you talk about pay plans. So it's a hot topic right now.
And these are the people who appraise cars.
Yeah, exactly. Mike, it was a pleasure. I appreciate you having me on. As always, I enjoy chatting with you, as you know, and look forward to next time.
Absolutely. And there will be a next time. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you all later.